Welcome to the latest episode of From the Horse's Mouth. And my name is Phil Fersht, and joining me today is a very long time industry stalwart, known figurehead, and someone I can call a good friend as well as advisor to HFS today is none other than Malcolm Frank. Welcome, Malcolm. How are you doing?
Hey, great to see you, man. How are things?
Yeah, good. Yeah, just getting my head around 2026.
I know. I'm glad we don't have to sign checks anymore because I'd always get the date wrong. So at least there's that benefit.
Yeah, there's that, and I was trying to figure out what the hell is going on in Venezuela and Iran this morning, but yeah, there's a lot going on in the world. So
Yeah.
great to have you on. For the benefit of our audience, I know a lot of people will know who you are, but some may not. Can you just maybe give everyone a little bit about you and your background and what you're doing today?
Sure. Gosh, I do a lot of things and been at this game for 35 years in a lot of different companies. But Phil, if I was to distill the whole thing, I don't know many things in this world, but I know how to grow tech services companies really fast. So I've been fortunate to work with a lot of market leaders, but in each case, we would go into markets that were growing 4%, 5%, and we were able to grow those companies 20, 30, 80%. So that's what I know well, just how to get into these firms, get service market fit, and help them grow really, really quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, you started out similar time to Waited, I think in the 90s with, was it Nervewire?
Prior to that, I was one of the founders at this firm, Cambridge Technology Partners. So that was a darling of the 90s, went through hyper growth. We started on MIT's campus, and that was at the client server wave, and grew it from pure startup to 7,000 people. And that was actually the best IPO in the 90s, not just of our industry, of any industry. That firm was important for lots of reasons, but one is it was the first tech services model like that went public. And I can remember speaking to bankers and going on roadshow and all the rest, and people would laugh at our faces. They would say, "Hold on, the assets walk out the door every night, and your visibility is only 180 days, and why should you float this thing again?" And so I think about that a lot when we're all looking at what's happening with an EPAM or an Infosys or a Globant and some of the market leaders of today.
Yeah, or Palantir as well for other
Right,
interesting
right.
kettle of fish. Um, so jumping into how services has changed, why was it back in the late 90s, everyone loved services, especially anything around the internet, and now Wall Street seems to put services right down the stack of valuations, and it's much more about software and scalability?
I'm very, very bullish on the services space in the medium and long term. But there's a logic to what Wall Street is going through that they recognize the current model is broken. And so when you look at these valuations that have crashed, it's just very, very simple. As AI washes over this market and washes over the business model that currently exists in IT services, they don't trust the 5-year cash flows. It's that simple. If there's something that could be delivered for 10 units today, and it's going to be delivered for 3 units 3 years from now, what is the associated value with that? Is there going to be enough price elasticity that when that unit cost collapses, that the
Right.
market opportunity is going to commensurately grow? So the street can't figure that out yet. This is why I'm so excited about this market transition, because this is where fortunes are made. This is where new leaders emerge. But that new model in the services space has yet to break out. These are exciting times, but to answer your question, the street is looking at these very large pyramid based organizations and are saying, I don't know what the future is going to hold, but I don't think that model is going to win.
And is it simply because the value isn't in just buying more people, the value is in how to get more from what you currently have?
That's
Or,
exactly right. That's
yeah,
exactly right. And so, it's you go with first principles thinking on the pyramid business model, getting a pyramid of humans, assigning a rate card to each of them. It's going to be this much time, so forth and so on. That pyramid is very, very quickly turning into an obelisk, number one. But then when you look across each service line and across the entire SDLC, it is getting eaten by AI. If there's anything I've learned, Phil, that one of the hardest things in the world to change, aside from yourself, is a publicly traded tech services company. They're extraordinarily hard to change. And so who is going to be able to navigate these seas and go through that fundamental change where at a unit level, how you deliver, what is the split between the human and the bot? What are the types of people? How do you build the structure? How do you price that? These are a lot of questions that nobody has properly answered at scale. I think there's a few green shoots, but that is the $64,000 question in the market. I think that's why HFS is so vitally important during these times, but nobody has quite figured it out yet.
Yeah, and that's I think the fascinating thing. I feel like we're in a market that's dominated by FOMO more than reality. And when do you get past that? I mean, I put out a piece recently, which was quite simply, you don't have to be the first mover in the space. Let somebody else go in, screw it up, make a big mess of this, let them
100%.
fund your own research, figure it out, and then make your move. We're almost in this sort of wait and see zone. Everyone's looking at each other, thinking,
Yep.
so you're going to try this, you're going to try that. I'm starting to see a couple of big, giant services firms almost launch out their own software platform businesses because they're realizing I've got to start playing as a platform, credible platform provider. I've got to somehow build that credibility up because right now, people don't come to me for technology, they're coming to me for people. How do we change that perception?
Well, that's right. You said a couple of really important things there. The first is, what do they say about pioneers? They're the ones with the arrows in their backs. So the R&D model, instead of it being internal, I really advise folks during these times, it's the old rip off and then deploy. You should be a student of the industry, watching every firm, watching every move, every new capability, and then say which ones are working and how do I become a very fast follower. And these markets evolve. It's interesting. In a way, they evolve slower than you think. They're sort of slow, and then all of a sudden. And we've seen this before in technology markets. When you think of the internet browser from Netscape through AOL through IE, and then it was Chrome, that was a multi-year journey. It was about half a decade, to get through that. The same as with search. I can remember when Google came out and I was like, oh, holy hell, the last thing we need is another search engine. There was Alta Vista and Ask Jeeves and Yahoo and the rest. I didn't understand Boolean at the time, but the point is that was a late entrant, if you will. The same is true. Think of all of the mobile devices that you had from. I started as a Scion guy, so it went from Scion to Palm Pilot to BlackBerry and, of course, iPhone. So these things take more time than you think, but you have to lay the foundations today so that you can really scale. So that's thought number one. Thought number two, I was thinking over the holidays, what did 2025 really represent? And how are we going to view that in our space? And Phil, I thought of it as it's sort of the parade of pretenders. That's what we had. And Carlota Perez, I don't know if you follow her work, but you're talking about Venezuela. She's this Venezuelan economist. That sounds like an oxymoron, but she now lives in the UK, but absolutely brilliant. And she's spent her entire career on mapping these large scale economic transitions that were created by a new machine. And she said the first few years, you get all of these speculators come in, all of the pretenders, all the charlatans, and you know who they are. Think in your personal life of latest thing guy. When we had the credit crisis, all of a sudden this person was an expert on CDOs in the mortgage market. And then COVID comes along and they know mRNA and intubation. And then, Ukraine breaks out and suddenly they understand geopolitics and they're correcting you on how to pronounce the capital of Ukraine. It's so that same person has become, self-appointed expert on RAG models and the rest. It creates a lot of confusion, but at the same time, I think that's a positive indicator of just how large this is. So if you're running one of these firms, how do you make sense of this very confusing environment? And I think you're right. It's this sense and respond, recognize what's working, pull it in quickly, and then start to scale against that.
Yeah. So we look at early movers. I think about, through all these different industries, and technology was always often at the core of a lot of these things. You mentioned search engines, and I remember Yahoo and Alta Vista, and Google entered late because it had a faster search engine with music. Pandora and SoundCloud proved that streaming worked, but they couldn't figure out the subscription model until Spotify came along.
Yep.
It's often these smaller firms are the ones that ultimately blow up the model. I mean, I look at Anthropic, and they seem to me they're a lot smaller than OpenAI, but that seems to be much more focused on the B2B model. They're figuring out how do clients want to leverage this technology better. Who do you think is going to really start to dominate this space as we look out maybe 12, 18, 24 months?
If you keep that aperture that you've seen just in the last 6 months, Anthropic and Google have really started to break out in the enterprise. And because they understand the needs of those buyers, and that there's a heavier lift, and there's considerations that they all have to deal with the consumer markets just obviously don't have to. And I often think of one of my greatest mentors. It was Bruce Rogo. So, Bruce was, he built the Magic Quadrant. So if people hate that thing, then you can blame Bruce. But he was a Gartner for ages. And then he became basically in his later years a CIO consigliere and one of the smartest people I know in the industry. But Bruce would always talk about this, Phil, that it doesn't matter what gets created on the supply side. What matters is how that can be ingested on the demand side, and how you can work with a large organization that has their infrastructure, their systems, their data, their process, their people, their culture, their security needs. And how do you navigate through all of that to make it easy for them to consume what you offer? And so when you look at firms that win in B2B, often it's not quote unquote the best technology, but it's those organizations that can work with large enterprises at their pace and deal with all of those issues. And so I think that you're starting to see both Anthropic, which is interesting as a young firm, and Google have started to do that very, very well from a model basis within the enterprise.
Yeah, because they're affecting more the individual within the enterprise than these great big corporate systems. Like if you remember how Mac infiltrated the enterprise 15 years ago, none of the big corporates wanted to buy Apple computers because they were more expensive and they had relationships with Dell and with other companies. But the users said, I want to use a Mac. And I think it's happening a bit with, we call this a velocity gap, but people are figuring out themselves, I've got to be really good at AI for my own career, my own knowledge, my own job. So everyone's saying, to hell with what my company's doing, I'm just going to figure out whether I like using Gemini or OpenAI or Claude, right, that sort of thing. So we as individuals are sort of driving this in a way of, I've got way better at doing my job. Now my company needs to support me so it can do its job well too. With that, I just came off a call with one of the leading fast food restaurant chains. And they basically said, we really can't do anything with AI because our whole company is literally beset to Oracle, Ariba, SAP. And unless they do something, we're stuck. We can't move until they move. And that sort of blew my mind a little bit in terms of, well, do you have to move? And it was sort of, well, to be honest with you, we don't actually have to move that fast because of the nature of our business. But then surely if you're in the insurance space or the retail space, these industries, I don't think you can afford to sit around and wait. So I think a lot of this is going to be industry by industry, but the other issue seems to be breaking out of these legacy technologies that are just holding everyone back from operating in a much more AI-driven mindset.
Yep. I'm laughing and breaking out in hives at the same time when you walk through that, because just to go back to the 90s, we heard that in spades, because at the time, we were putting in client server systems. So the RDBMS and the Unix server and PCs, that was very new to folks at the time. And they would give the same arguments that I'm on my VAX machines. I've invested so much in my 370 platform. I'm going to go at the pace that DEC or IBM or whomever is going to guide me through this. And firms that do that, there's a word for them. It's called bankrupt. But their arguments to them were sound, meaning that this stuff is too new. They don't have all the tools and the security that I really demand. And the market is very, very unsettled. So back when it was Oracle versus Ingress, Informix, Sybase, or it was all these flavors of Unix. I'm just going to sit on the sidelines and let that sort itself out. And when it does, I'm going to become a late entrant. So that was the logic. But what you lost was you weren't building the use cases. Your IT team wasn't building the sophistication around these new capabilities and understanding, how to build them at scale inside your organization. And so for firms that, today, because the clock speed is so much faster in the market and internally, if you don't understand how these models work, how the new stack works, and how to implement these capabilities for your users, you're going to be irrelevant very, very quickly.
Right. So where does that change occur? Is it leadership? Like having maybe leadership that suddenly gets the changes on us and we have to really make some braver bets? Because I see an awful lot of companies out there whose leadership still don't get this. They're paying lip service to it. The reality is they're either slaves to their quarterly results or quite simply just can't get their head around the change and they don't want to change.
Well, I'll give people more credit. I think they want to, they don't know how. And what it is, Phil, they get trapped in a structure. It's, what's the old adage that first we define our structures and then our structures define us. So these people will have a theory of the business, of just how it operates. And then they create an organizational structure that supported that. So just look at the atomic level. If you want to get these new systems in place, services software and these AI capabilities and agents to the right people, who owns that? Who is the individual that owns that? Because you would say, oh, that's the CIO. But when it gets down to, first of all, many IT organizations in the last 20 years have been hollowed out. So they don't have that capability to build bespoke software into really solution. Because that's a combination in the AI world of people plus the agents. And so when you're that CIO, you obviously know the technology and can vet which vendors to bring in. But when you get into, well, how do we re-architect this entire process? How do we re-architect the roles and the jobs within that? And go through all of the skills and understand who should be doing this and where should the human end and the bot begin. That is, they're out of their depth. Now, you would think that HR can do that. But the problem is, HR is typically the recruiting and benefits people, and they don't understand the technology. So this is where you're sort of stuck with that structure where you don't have those teams that can see how does that combination work at an atomic level with the human, and then it goes up into a process, a workflow, a solution, and they start to build against that, which is why it just opens the door for new entrants who are organized that way and who get it and can scale very quickly.
Yeah. And so for the big companies struggling with this exact change that we spoke about, do you think they need to appoint a chief AI officer? And maybe that's a role that is designed to extinct itself in a 3-year period? Do you think that's what they need to do?
Yes and no. So the short answer is yes, but we've been to this bad movie when you had, for example, the chief digital officer, and in some cases, that person had real teeth, and in other cases, it was just somebody who had a nice window seat and would fly to conferences. So, but I view this in a context, Phil, of how the market is evolving. And what we're going into is, I think, the third great chapter of enterprise IT, and then what that means for services firms and for the internal organization. The first was automation, and that was from 1995 to 2015, roughly, of putting in all the enterprise apps. So this was your ERP, CRM, HRM, financials, supply chain. And we take that for granted now. It's sort of like when you drive on the interstate highway and you're like, oh, this has always been here. You're like, no, it hasn't. It just was built before your lifetime. So I think of that as sort of that interstate highway of these organizations. And that was a very heavy lift for those 2 decades. So that was number one of automation and standardization of process. The second is that we went through this decentralization, for lack of a better term, meaning everything was tightly coupled on-prem. And the decentralization movement allowed 2 markets to absolutely explode. And the first was global delivery. So instead of everybody being in a room in Topeka, I can now deliver this, from many places around the globe. And in an Indian context, just look at the miracle of the millions of people that were employed against that model. But then the second thing that happened in parallel with decentralization is you decentralize the machine, the movement to cloud. And that created these trillion-dollar enterprises of Azure and GCP and AWS, where instead of everything being tightly coupled in a room, it was just in a server farm somewhere. So that decentralization is the second big one. But we're about to enter this third one that I think is larger than the prior two, and the prior two enabled it. And AI is driving this. And I can't think of the right term, but I'll just say it's dematerialization. And so it's, even though you went to decentralization, you still had those human beings working in a pyramid model on those systems, delivering something. But now that's getting dematerialized with a combination of AI plus people. So where I have optimism is that management teams figured out how to navigate those first two transitions. So obviously they have to do the third, but there is no playbook yet on how to get from A to B. And so that's where firms get stuck. I'll never forget when you talked about retail, when the Amazon model was really starting to take off and Netflix was starting to take off. We had a large retail practice at Cognizant, and we'd go and meet with a lot of our retail clients. And there was this wall of denial. And I had one CEO actually got pretty annoyed with me in a meeting because I was pushing, you've got to make this transition. And he said, stop with the fear porn. Stop telling me my business is going to get Amazoned. Now, turned out that business got horribly Amazoned within 5 years. But I'm seeing that reaction where there is this denial of, maybe AI is going to impact other parts of society or other industries, but it's not going to hit mine.
I like this. We talked about the Amazonification of services a few years ago. And it's interesting because Amazon is getting Amazoned in many respects. Like, there's a school of thought that TikTok is going to become the next retail platform. Because people are buying off very personalized platforms now. It doesn't matter who the hell's delivering it to your front door, as long as it shows up, right? I've been buying tons of stuff off Instagram, but that's beside the point. But people like getting sold to and like getting personalized to, and I think things are in a constant evolution. And it's interesting. We look at different industries are moving at different speeds, and how do companies figure this out? So I go back to the why, the what, and the how this is really going to figure this out. So why is there an issue? Like, is there a real problem that's going to change our business? Are we going to become extinct if we don't react? Then it's the what. So what do we actually do?
Yes.
And then it's finally, how do we do it? And I think most companies are still in that why and what situation. I've mapped this to what I've called the 3-year lifespan of a chief AI officer, where you start off with a stabilization phase where you really, you start to figure out the why, and you assess your readiness, confront your debts, your tech debt, your people debt. Then you get to focus. So it's prioritizing high impact use cases, kill the peripheral pilots. Then you sort of get to sort of year 2 in this, you get to the embed phase where it's integrating AI into the flow. When you know what you're doing, you then integrate the AI into workflows and redesign roles, etc. Then finally we get to what I'm calling, this is the 3-year out plan, is the dissolve phase, which is you transition AI ownership into the functional leaders. And then, as I said, you have to bid ciao to the CAIO at that point. It's a 3-year transition. We've all got to go through it. And I think if we get to sort of a more of a, this is how we need to think about this. And it may be, hey, I'm in the cement business. We don't need to move that fast. Things change every decade. But I think going by healthcare, look at life sciences, look at retail, look at insurance. These are industries where I think you could be out of business in 5 minutes if you don't make the flip. And I worry that our industry of services is in that spot. I'm seeing little mid-tiers coming along who are just way more aggressive. They can flip very quickly. They can embed AI models, which based on Amazon or Google or Microsoft, and the speed of change, I think, is already happening, and we're just waking up to realize that.
Yep. Agreed. And I mean, you said a lot of big things there, but a few reactions. One is I love the chow to chow, so that's quite good. But the first thought, Phil, where you started is what's happening from an individual consumer experience, what's happening in the market. And AI, it's interesting, it's working bottom up and then top down. So the bottom up is from the NVIDIA through the models. That's where the action and the investment is. But now it's moving up into data and agents. So it's starting to creep up the stack. But from the consumer side, you have these cases, the Instagrams, the TikToks, where you already get hyper personalization. And so it's already created that consumer expectation of what I should gain when this organization deeply understands who I am and can curate the world and bring it to me in the way that I want to see it. So you're right. Those firms that have captured that, can they enter new spaces more easily than other firms? This is going to be the classic Amazon versus Sears. Is that going to start happening in some of these other categories? So I think that that's absolutely what's starting to occur. The second is what industries. And remember back in the internet bubble, the time of the great happiness when, Wired magazine it was the size of Vogue back when they would publish it. It was 2 inches thick. It was all ads. But we thought that the internet was going to transform everything. And just take a look at retail. There was pets.com, but today there's pet retailers everywhere. We thought that the auto dealership was going to go away. Obviously, you buy your car and service it at a dealership today. Webvan, if you remember that we were not going to have grocery stores. And of course, we still go to the grocery store. But there were a few pockets of retail that got eviscerated. So if you look back, there were very important reasons for that. And the same is going to be true with AI. So some sectors, it's going to radically transform very quickly. And others, you're going to look and say, yeah, we do a few things, but it really wasn't that transformative. And the qualities, if you look at insurance, I think insurance is going to move very, very quickly with AI. And one is it's all data. And that is a data business. And the two things you need to do, which is where the use cases are starting to take off, is it's a lot of automation, number one. So you could just start ripping raw cost out of the system, like in the call center. Or secondly, and more interestingly, probabilistic solutions. That industry is all purely probabilistic. And so the actuarial science with AI can be completely transformed. So that may move very, very fast within insurance. But then other spaces, it may not move as quickly. I think we're in for interesting times on that front.
Yeah, maybe realize some of these gambling industries should move into insurance, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like you're in the middle of a football game and the odds are shifting constantly for who's going to score next, who's going to do this, who's going to do that. Thinking, wow, and that's sort of a human being doing that stuff. But you're absolutely right, and the permission to play is really shifting. Like as I was saying, it's like, hey, I'm being sold a Carvac on Instagram for $29.99. It looks great, and I can press this button, it becomes a snowblower. I'm just going to buy that. Why? Because I trust Instagram pretty much as I trust Amazon now, because I'm using my Apple Pay, and I trust Apple Pay because it's linked to this, and it's the permission to play, I think, is really, really changing. And where it's really starting to shift is services. Like I'm starting to see emerging services firms led by emerging talent some of them have come from the big firms who get it. And I'm seeing deals that will blow your mind. Like I'm sure you're seeing some as well, but I'm seeing some which is like 90% headcount takeout, especially in areas like call center. I'm also seeing deals which are going from 6,000 to 1,000 FTEs over a period of 3 years. And the clients are just willing to take the bet. They're at the point of saying, I got to take the bet. And this starts to get me thinking about where services is going. Is many, many enterprises have now put tons of their resources out into India. GCCs have been burgeoning at 20% growth a year, that sort of thing. And I'm like, isn't this like temporary fixing of a longer term problem? Like right now, people are leveraging AI because it means we can get more out of what we got. Surely phase two is, why do I need all these people just sitting around developing stuff that I just don't need anymore. I mean, surely the services industry is going to go through a change that, we haven't envisaged in 20, 30 years.
Yep, agreed. And there's going to be blood. And I'll give you one quick anecdote. You and I both know Frank D'Souza very well, and he's one of the heroes of the industry. But when Frank and I this is probably 2010 in that time frame, 2011, and EDS wanted to partner with us at Cognizant. And we were so flattered at the time. We're like, oh, we're this little firm and this is a market leader and they want to partner in these markets. And 5 years later, we had just zipped right past them. And had you told us that in the moment, we would not have believed it. If a little genie came down and said, let me give you 5 scenarios of how things will unfold, and then that was the last one, we would have just exploded with laughter and said, yeah, that's not going to happen. So that's how fast these things shift. And it's this client recognition of, I want to have that level of raw cost takeout in my operations, but I'm also going to insist upon it with my services provider. And they're very quickly starting to figure out who is serious about that journey and who isn't. And you're starting to see that within the league tables.
You got companies like Salesforce who are trying to eat their way into the services space with their agent force offerings, and ServiceNow is doing it. Other companies are doing it. At the same time, you've got some of the smarter services firms looking at this thinking, why are we ceding so much power to these software application firms? Because the ultimate goal is having an AI-driven capability. I don't think the clear winners have emerged in the services space.
No.
I think this is very early in a big bloodbath that 2026 is going to give us a big window into.
Well, I've had this conversation with several CIOs, and they all feel there are 3 in the last quarter who said the same thing, and they don't know each other. It was wild. I don't know if they got the same source, but it was the same thought. That they said as recent as 5 years ago, they had 5 to 10 really lean-on vendors. And so this would be an Accenture plus a TCS, a Microsoft, an Oracle. The firms, they would just lean on to future-proof their businesses. And the light bulb has gone off with them that they're like, the hyperscalers are now becoming those firms that, so when you look at the level of investment that Google or AWS or Microsoft are able to make around AI, and vis-a-vis the R&D that is in a services model, and they're like, it's not 100 to 1 or 1,000 to 1, it's like 10,000 to 1. And also the waterline of services and software, the software is just creeping up really, really rapidly. So where are you going to future-proof your business? Where are you going to place your bets? With whom are you going to spend your time? And so that ear of the client is really shifting from the trusted advisor being somebody at Deloitte, somebody at Wipro, to now it's really becoming that person who can help curate everything that's coming out of the AI ecosystem and can operationalize it in my context. And that tends to be the big 3 in terms of the cloud or hyperscalers.
Interesting. Very interesting. So as we're coming to the end of this conversation, let's fast forward to January 2027. What do you honestly think we're going to be talking about?
I think we're going to recognize that this shift has started to, where you talked about these models that are starting to take off, I think they're going to start to emerge. Right now, if you look in January 26, the talk of the town is the Palantir Distill model when you're in the tech services space. I think that's a head fake. I'll tell you why. Everybody's enamored of the FDE model, the forward deployed engineer, and that is important. But then I look back and go, we've done this multiple times with different technologies. And it's just having that expert who can be parachuted into the client environment and show them the new way. But the issue, Phil, is in a services environment that doesn't scale. I believe deeply that the best businesses are when you can do extraordinary things with ordinary people. Those are the businesses that can go from 200 million to 1 billion to 5 billion to 20 billion. And when you look at the Distill or Palantir model from a services standpoint, right now, they're doing extraordinary things with extraordinary people. And so we've actually gone through and looked at every single FDE in those companies, and they're very impressive human beings, but they're extraordinarily hard to get and equally hard to build. But I think that firms are going to figure out those models. Now, what is the pathway? I think the pathway in 26 with the enterprise, what are the no regret moves that they need to take? Yeah. And I think that their number one is cleaning up your data estate. So the services firms that understand how to get that data estate from A to B to get it AI ready are going to have a terrific couple of years. So that's one. The second, you talk about it, is how do you deliver what I think of as cost of goods sold? Meaning, if you look at our industry for the past 20, 25 years, we all thought we were the cool kids. We were actually sort of boring because the vast majority of IT services spend has been on SG&A. Hey, just look at the top SaaS vendors today. Salesforce, Workday, ServiceNow. They're great companies, not to disparage them in any way, but it's all SG&A stuff. And so when you go back to your TikTok example, that is cost of goods sold. How do you infuse AI into the product or the service and completely transform the customer experience? And so that's a different muscle than most of these firms have. So those that can speak that vertical language, deliver that in an agentic model, and change the game for that client, those are the firms that are going to win. But instead of being these horizontal platforms, we would spend all this time saying, who's got the biggest ERP practice? Who's got a great CRM practice? It's going to be, okay, in retail, who can completely transform the customer experience through AI, from the models, through the data, and the agents, the people, and then the products that do that. So I think those are going to start to emerge this year, and we'll have this new category of 5 to 10 companies in January of 27. And the way we spoke about, remember when mobile broke out and nobody could figure it out, and then the Eastern Europeans did. It was EPAM, it was Endava, Globant, they're not Eastern European, but those are the firms that understood how to deliver against that model. And they were these bolts out of the blue. I think we're going to see the same of firms that figure out how to deliver against the AI model.
Yeah. Any particular predictions on one or two firms you think are going to make that breakout?
I'm on the board of two that I'm very enthusiastic about. One is Calent, that's in the AWS space. Another is PH Data, that's in the data space. And it's so much fun to be part of those companies. They're going through this hyper growth phase, and it's this virtuous cycle where their clients are delighted, their ecosystem partners love them, their employees are growing like crazy, and so those start to then build upon themselves. So those are a couple that I'm very close to that we're starting to recognize. I'm fascinated. I brought up Distill earlier. There's a lot of attention being paid there. They are extraordinary with their tech chops and their AI chops. But I wonder about how they start to build that model out and how they can verticalize it and start to solution it. That's a different culture. That's a different rhythm. So I'm watching that with intent, but to me, that's a 50-50 play on how that's going to turn out.
Yeah. Well, this has been a phenomenal conversation. Extraordinary things from ordinary people. It's what's going to stick with me a lot from this conversation. And as always, great to catch up with you, hear your evolving thoughts. Very much so at the moment, like most exciting time I ever had as an analyst.
Thanks for tuning in to From the Horse's Mouth, Intrepid Conversations with Phil Fersht. Remember to follow Phil on LinkedIn and subscribe and like on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite platform for no-nonsense takes on the intricate dance between technology, business, and ideological systems. Got something to add to the discussion? Let's have it. Drop us a line at fromthehorsesmouth@hfsresearch.com or connect with Phil on LinkedIn.